Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and Contrast Security. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion or you'd like to share it with a friend, the recording will be available shortly after the webinar concludes today. If you have any questions for our speakers, I want you to direct those to the Q&A tab. You can find that on the right side of your screen. And if you have any comments to add to our conversation, or you just want to let us know from where you're tuning in, direct those comments to the chat tab. Finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stick around. On to our topic at hand today, we'll be discussing incorporating DevSecOps into Openshift environments with Contrast Security. And I'm joined today by Mark Tomza, Senior Alliance Solutions Architect at Contrast Security. And at this point in time, it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Mark to get us kicked off. Mark, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. Today, we'll be talking about embedding DevSecOps into OpenShift environments with OpenShift and Contrast Security. So before we get into it, we're going to do some brief introductions, followed by going over software delivery at a glance, giving you an idea to level set on what actually we're talking about in terms of software delivery and how we incorporate security inside. We'll touch upon DevSecOps, providing security as a value stream, then extending that security to have a more complete solution. We will go over the Contrast and OpenShift integration. Ankur on the line. We'll go over the demo. And finally, we'll follow up with some questions. So before we get into it, here's some introductions. So my name is Mark Tomza. I work on the strategic alliances side at Contrast Security. And a little background about myself. So I've been a little all over the place. I've helped build software, sell software. I've run a couple of SIs. More or less, I've helped companies evolve from brick and mortar revenue streams to a more software-oriented revenue stream. So everything digital transformation and all that good stuff like containers and serverless. Thank you. Jafar, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. So my name is Jafar Shraibi. I've been with Red Hat for over 5 years, focusing on our OpenShift container platform. Today, I work as a technical marketing manager for OpenShift, focusing on pipelines and DevOps. And prior to that, I've been working as a solution architect, covering various things like how you build applications with our runtimes, how you containerize your applications, how you build mobile apps and such things. So very glad to be here today to talk about OpenShift and Contrast in a DevSecOps context.
Very happy you're able to join. Ankur, you're next.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name is Ankur Papneja. At Contrast, I'm a product manager, and I have a strong focus on integrations. So helping our customers figure out how to embed security into their workflows and allowing them to reap the biggest benefit of it across their entire application portfolio. So great conversation to have today. And Jafar, I'm very glad to have you with us today.
Yep, thank you both.
Thank you very much, guys.
So software delivery at a glance. So to level set, what is software delivery? Well, if you're all familiar with software life cycles, essentially the software delivery is the entire process of getting your software product to your end consumer or your customer. It starts from conceptualization, goes through development, right, in terms of enhancement processes with business, and ends up with an actual installation of the product license and availability to the user. It's the heart of what we call the software factory, right? The assembly line that we use to not only templatize and codify things, but enable things like scale and low overhead in terms of consumption, right? And in terms of consumption, these are consumed by what we call cross-functional application product teams. So what we mean by cross-functional teams is you have everything you need within that team structure to get the software out the door into your consumer's hands and functioning, but you will be leveraging things like platform teams, automation to actually make things go faster. So we create the business logic. We work with the team members there to make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck. We consume the automation from the platform team and then essentially put it on a conveyor belt so it ends up in our consumers' hands. Anything you guys want to add here before I move on?
I think we're fine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And this is a diagram of what we just talked about. So as you can see here, you have three different cross-functional teams, three different application teams, all utilizing automation from the platform teams itself. And this is used to communicate how software is actually delivered within the enterprise, that assembly line. So where, again, the application owner dictates the prioritization of those business value, right? The criteria, AKA story points. If you're custom software development, business requirements, they're fed into the developer. Developer comes in, enhances it, right, via code, and then consumes the automation for the lifecycle via pipeline that the platform team provides. And what does the platform team do? They create the pipelines and they create the avenue, almost like the assembly line or the highway, that the business units can utilize to plug into. So as an example, we're talking security and DevSecOps. Usually within an enterprise, in a legacy enterprise, this would be a different department, right? With cross-functional teams, you usually have a security member within each cross-functional teams, and then you actually have a value stream as well that's allocated specifically to security that's utilized by your pipelines via different types of integrations that we'll be talking about down the line. Did I miss anything, guys, or did that just about cover it?
I think that's fine. So one thing I like about this diagram is that it shows arrows that go from both directions, from the platform team to the pipeline and from the application teams to the pipeline, meaning that there is a strong focus on collaboration. So the platform team cannot on its own understand the ins and outs of the applications, and the developers don't understand like the constraints of production that the platform teams need to take into consideration. So basically your pipeline gets the best of everything because of this collaborative approach. And I think it's going to be a key in our conversation, a key topic in the conversation.
I'm going to set it better myself.
Another thing I would add here is you'll notice that each of these three streams are exactly the same in terms of the contents. And that speaks to how you're able to achieve consistency across your application teams. Now, there may be some differences here and there, but the main point being that how the business delivers software is consistent across your application teams, and you're able to achieve a lot better scale in that way.
Exactly, along with speed.
Yes, speed as well.
So yeah, it should be a repeatable process that can cover a lot of ground and not have something very specific to each application. Indeed.
Exactly.
Right, and that way, your developers can focus on building applications rather than figuring out how to deploy their applications.
Exactly, and this evolves basically into what we call the software security stream, right? When you're doing things like DevSecOps. So, looking at these approaches, right? You want to take a systematic approach, as the team here mentioned. You want to look at an overarching business model, right? When incorporating this into your technology stacks, meaning everything as a build, everything deploys, you need tests, you have compliance, and you have things like audit, right? You want to factor all those into a consistent business flow, as Ankur mentioned, to be able to templatize these flows for speed, consistency, reliability, essentially guaranteeing that what you put in is what you get out, right? And tools and processes are an extension of that. These represent the value streams you're incorporating via the pipeline integrations, right? We always talk about DevOps. We always talk about cloud native. The big thing here is even when we started doing DevOps, security was still an afterthought, right? With DevSecOps, we're breaking down the silos, allowing the communication. Then with cloud native, we're taking a step further to allow for speed, agility, and scale through things like hyperautomation, right? Within the enterprise, where we're only using pipelines to actually do everything that a business unit would do, right? So that would lead to things like DevSecOps, where we create the automation, leverage it, and encompass the security value stream through those different integration types. And Jafar, do you want to kind of touch upon that?
Yeah, I think so. You're addressing some key topics here. The systematic approach is something that we refer to as templating your approach to pipelines, where you don't want to reinvent the wheel for every new project. You want to have this notion of consistency, repeatability, and we'll be speaking about some changes that happened in the CI/CD landscapes to allow teams to do that, basically, like with pipelines as code and such things. So yeah, that's
awesome.
a key aspect.
All right. And this is basically just the diagram we just spoke about, and Jafar hit upon this, where when you're adding these value streams, you're templatizing these automations, you want those business units working together to add to the value that you're delivering for your end consumer. So if you see on the screen here, you have compliance, security, infrastructure provisioning, networking, all the pieces you need to have functioning software that enable the value to be actually accessed by your end consumer, right? So it could be a website, it could be a service. The important thing here is the business logic, the business flow is the exact same. So those changes in semantics that Jafar was mentioning, those are at the application level, meaning, yes, everything has a build, but that type of build is pertinent to the type of application being built. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you can apply this to pretty much any value stream within an organization. Here we'll be talking about DevSecOps and security in general, but you can apply it to things like networking, compliance, identity access management, you name it. And then the way it would be incorporated again is via an API, which would then plug into an integration which is present within the platform team's pipelines they are then delivering to the developer. That's how the whole story fits. And I got ahead of myself, so sorry about that, but this is where it happens, the magic, right? Where we get those integration points, we get security involved in all of our pipelines. Great. Well, how does this actually work into adding value via, DevSecOps and security value streams? Well, it's all about the telemetry, actionable telemetry. When you're going through and you're constructing these pipelines, you actually want to limit the amount of human interaction within these pipelines to make sure it's as consistent as possible, right? What comes in is what comes out. And you're driving actions through data, right? The telemetry provided by the integration points. So it could be vulnerabilities, it could be route coverage, and in terms of security, it could be a lot of different things. The big thing you want to communicate here is you want to make actionable decisions, gates, right? That are based upon this information. And you guys want to touch upon this?
Yeah, I think so. If we refer back to the principle of DevOps, one of the key aspects was this notion of continuous feedback that allows you to take actionable, to take action once you get the information out. So for instance, you deliver your new version of your application and you see that there's a security issue, or you see that there's a scaling issue or whatever, you need to be able to get that information back. And I think that that's what you guys are providing in terms of security. Not only you do the scanning, but you are also able to say, okay, so something happened here along the way in the pipeline. How do we move forward? So should we stop the pipeline? Should we remediate the application? Should we send an alert to an external system or something like that? And that's where it falls into this notion of continuous feedback,
Exactly.
which is a pillar in the DevSecOps approach.
And if you need to have continuous feedback kind of in alignment to a DevSecOps model, then it can't be manual where that feedback is coming in. There needs to be automation so that that feedback can come in, as many times as possible throughout the entire process. So I'll tee that up for you, Mark, in terms of what automation capabilities are in store for the audience here.
Yeah, so just kind of give you guys a little preview where you see the security aspects within the pipelines themselves. We actually went ahead on contrast side and worked with Red Hat. So thanks again for working with us. But I want to note that with these integration points, we've got things like source to image, pipeline technologies. The basis are here though, in terms of communicating the value. It's a way to leverage the business flow, right? In a repeated way that doesn't change the underlying workflows of the other teams, right? You give that consistency, but also the flexibility to plug into it and do what's needed to get the job done. That's the biggest thing here. And how do we extend security? Well, before we get into that, I'll touch upon this and I'll hand it off to Jafar just to kind of hit upon some things that are available in OpenShift as well. Maybe Ankur has some thoughts, but with security being multi-dimensional, contrast security plays at the application security layer. There are multiple facets of security. If you guys have been around long enough, I know I feel old, but I've been in the cloud for like 10 plus years, which doesn't seem like much, right? But it's in terms of like practical experience, it's a bunch, because a lot of this new stuff, these PaaS environments have security out of the box. You still have to account for it. But as you can see in this list here, this is only a little subset of security that you can see. But thinking about security in general, right? There's multiple layers that you have to address, right? It's not just a networking layer like it used to be, right? Ports are with policies, things like that. There's roles associated with it, RBAC, authentication, infrastructure security. Here at Contrast, we're more or less on the application security side, right? Everything runtime, going through, giving you the vulnerabilities, protecting, all that good stuff. And Ankur will give you a little more on that. But what I want to do here is kind of hand it to Jafar. Maybe he wants to talk about other aspects of security.
Yeah, sure. When we speak about, so you said you were in the cloud for 10 plus years, and if you think at some groundbreaking technologies that happened, like Kubernetes, containers, it was like really a revolution, I would say, in the IT space. And things also needed to change in the way you address things like security, where we needed to adapt to those new technology sets. And if we speak about an application, so you do provide the layers or the security mechanism to address the application layer. But if you speak about containers, you know that you are going to package your application into an image, and you need to make sure that this image itself does not have vulnerabilities. And these are some of the security aspects that we provide with the platform. We have a tool called ACS that allows us, for instance, to scan images to check if there are CVEs and such things. And it's actually a very complementary aspect to what you guys do, because you are bringing your expertise in the application security layer, and we are bringing our expertise in the containers and the infrastructure security layer with the platform. So yeah, I think it plays very well together, and we'll probably have a few words about that a bit later on.
And you're right. So this actually touched upon exactly what Jafar was talking about. There's different aspects of security included within your entire life cycle, right? It's not just the application layer, but the application layer is included in there, right? To where contrast goes with the runtime, meaning it travels where the app is traveling, but you still need protection about everything else. Like Jafar mentioned, container security, scanning, right? The infrastructure side, there's Kubernetes as an actual orchestrator, right? A scheduler for containers. There are many different aspects. What this illustrates is you have to account for all these aspects to make sure that your supply chain is covered end to end. And Ankur, do you want to touch upon this before I move on?
No, I think you hit all the good points there.
All right. And the big things here are the keys to success. So we touched upon how you would, from a systematic approach, take a look at the picture and how you start incorporating security, right? Here, you want to actually use these methodologies to complement what we just talked about, meaning you want to start designing with security in mind, right? First and foremost, at the foundational layer. You want to start using development practices as test-driven development, test-driven security, right? Going through and actually creating those tests as you're creating the business logic within your application, verifying it, and having those feedback loops actually take over the entire workflow. So you get speed, consistency, and the frequency at which you release, right, software becomes so great that the incremental changes aren't that great. So you have to do things like rollback. It's not that big of an issue. The inclusion of security into application teams. We go back to cross-functional teams, right? You have to have security embedded in those teams, or else it's going to be a problem, because there are value stream that needs to be associated with every piece of software that is client-facing, right? The notion of shift left. Everyone's heard it, developer first. You're going to hear it again, developer first. But it's based on the consumption that the automation, the platform team provides, right? So here, the developer is going through a coding, they're utilizing the automation provided, right? But everything in terms of configurations and whatnot are shifting left. They're codified, right? They're at the base layer of the repository, meaning they're at the starting point. So if there's a change, it's recorded, it can be audited, and it's compliant. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
And then in terms of shared responsibility models, those change as you go through different types of applications. But what you want to do, again, is account for security. How does security fit into the picture? Whether it be an on-premise, off-premise solution, microservice, legacy, there needs to be security associated with that. Fail fast. I tell people all the time, this goes back to the feedback loops. If you fail, I want it to fail now, because basically you want to go through and fail as many times as you want, but I need to get that piece of software the right way into production ASAP. So however many times it takes to fail, we got to do that in order to get the value. Let's do it. Let's do it now. I tell people all the time, you're going to fail. Your objective is to fail fast.
Yeah, you want to shift. You want to shift left your failure too.
Exactly. Yes, so that's a good point. So you want to be more upstream, right? You want to be downstream because downstream costs way more money and there are way more problems. So,
exactly. Yeah.
You know, and this goes into empowering processes in teams. Same thing. Because you're failing fast, you're taking less pressure off the teams, right? And this is the firm belief in automation. You let the automation do what it's supposed to do. Automate. So how does this all fit together with contrast and Openshift? Ankur, the stage is yours.
Cool. So just a quick overview of what contrast provides. As Mark was mentioning, it's within the realm of application security. So things like code scanning for vulnerabilities, supply chain security, are all within the scope of what Contrast offers in our application security platform that is actually purpose-built for modern tech stacks like microservices and serverless functions. So that's the neat thing about Contrast. But the most interesting thing is that we have the context of the application, we have the runtime context, so that the vulnerabilities we do detect are true positives. They're the ones that the application does have. We're able to filter out, using that runtime context, vulnerabilities that are actually false positives. And I think that's what a lot of our customers appreciate about our platform, is that the signal to noise ratio is very low. And so we only provide information about what truly matters. And I think that's the most important thing that you should know about the Contrast platform.
And that's why you have to fail fast, because that goes along the same message, right? You fail fast, but you also want to fail in the right thing, meaning you want to limit noise.
Exactly. Yep.
So Jafar, you want to go over a little bit about some CICD?
Yeah, sure. So we spoke about some evolutions that happened in the IT landscape, and Kubernetes or cloud native are some of those biggest impacting changes that happened. And basically, prior to this new era, you needed some CI/CD systems that you had to install, maintain, and run somewhere to be actually able to run your pipelines. And the Kubernetes landscape has evolved by providing cloud native CI/CD, where Kubernetes becomes your CI/CD platform and relies on all of those key aspects, such like using containers to be able to run your pipelines at scale and be able to have a serverless approach where things are triggered, like instead of having a CI/CD agent somewhere, you are relying on the underlying concepts of Kubernetes to be able to trigger your pipelines only when needed and such things. And of course, it all goes into allowing you to better implement DevOps or DevSecOps approaches. And one of the key aspects is that it needs to have this notion of extensibility to fit within your IT landscape. So basically, your pipeline should be able to integrate or touch point with many items. And what we're going to be focusing on today with the demo is how actually the pipelines can integrate with Contrast. And I think Ankur will be speaking about this. So just a few words about OpenShift pipelines, if we can go to the next slide. So yeah, again, as I mentioned, it takes advantage of what Kubernetes offers in terms of extensibility and scalability. And I believe what you guys did is you've been able to extend OpenShift pipelines with some tasks that are specific to contrast, because it's relying on this upstream project called Tecton, where everything that you design is code-based. So you are defining your pipeline as a YAML resource, basically in Kubernetes. It's pipelines as code, and you can now integrate your pipeline alongside your application in your code in your repository, and have the platform trigger the pipelines for you. Next slide, please.
All right.
Yeah, so just a quick overview, but Anchor is going to be doing the actual demo on the OpenShift platform. So I didn't touch upon the platform itself. OpenShift is the leading Kubernetes platform. It provides a lot of capabilities in terms of being able to run your applications in containers and build your applications. So we have developer services, but what we'll be focusing on today is the CICD, the native CICD. A service called OpenShift Pipelines that allows you to design, run your pipelines natively on the platform itself.
Exactly. All right.
Okay, yeah, next slide. So very briefly, you spoke about application security, but OpenShift does also, I would say, complement that with other aspects. We have our security solution, container security focused solution called Red Hat ACS, or Advanced Cluster Security for Kubernetes. And basically, it's going to bring things like image scanning and vulnerability assessments and being able to do some risk analysis when you deploy your applications into your containerized environments and such things. So yeah, I think it's a very complementary value proposition. We're not going to be focusing too much on that, but yeah, it's when you're going to address the CI, the supply chain, you're going to need to focus on application topics, but you're going also to need to address infrastructure security, networking security, OS security, and such things. And that's where I think the two solutions play well together. You do provide some layers, we do provide some complementary layers, and then you have I would say, the most complete coverage in your supply chain.
I couldn't agree more.
All right. Yeah, so one of the examples, again, is if we speak about Kubernetes, we describe everything as YAML resources. And we have, for example, this feature called linter, where you can basically analyze your YAML files and detect something like the application is going to run with elevated privileges. So you guys are able to analyze the application vulnerabilities. We are able to analyze if there's something wrong with the way we intend to deploy the application. And thus we have a broader coverage of the security potential issues that can happen.
Which is a great compliment, like you were saying, to the actual full picture of a platform system.
Sure. Okay. So Anchor, I think the floor is yours now.
Awesome. So just to touch on where contrast fits within OpenShift, or where OpenShift fits within contrast, there's three main areas where that happens. The first is source to image. So the idea of having a tool that will take source code and build it into an image is one of the things we offer, with the addition of adding our agent into that application, into that image. So any application that is run there is automatically has our agent injected. And the value of that is the agent is able to provide us with that runtime context so that we can filter out false positive vulnerabilities, as I was mentioning earlier. And then the second two for Jenkins and OpenShift pipelines are ways that organizations can trigger our code scanning tools. So contrast can, as well as to gate, as we were talking about earlier, fail fast, fail early, gate these pipelines so that we're catching these issues early on, and we can take action before they cause a lot more time delay later on in the pipeline. So those OpenShift and Jenkins pipelines, we offer gates so that you can make sure that no vulnerable applications get deployed to production.
Awesome. And the demo. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna stop my share, and then Ankur, if you could start sharing.
Yes, I will do that. So here I have open my OpenShift console from Red Hat, and I'm in the pipeline section, and you see here a few pipelines that have been created in the past. I'm going to focus in on the Java one here, just because that's one of the more popular programming languages that we support. So this workflow diagram basically lists out all of the different steps and tasks, these custom tasks that we offer from Contrast that you can add into your pipeline. And if you think about how to embed DevSecOps into your pipeline, specifically for application security, this is what that visualization would look like. So all of these custom tasks you see right here, as well as in this diagram, are things from Contrast that either initiate scans or check for number of vulnerabilities to make sure that the number is not too high. So this is a great pseudo reference architecture, if you will, to see how DevSecOps should look like in a pipeline. I'll go over to the pipeline run section here, the tab, and click into an example execution where we see that most of the checks have passed, the tasks have passed, with the exception of one being that there was a failure in the new criticals task. And what this is saying is that there was at least one new critical vulnerability found in that subsequent run of this pipeline. And so going into the logs, you'll be able to learn more about those individual tasks and what their different results were. But it'll eventually take you to this Contrast console where you can go into that application that you ran with OpenShift pipelines, click into this vulnerabilities tab, and we see that this one critical vulnerability was the reason that pipeline run failed, specifically because of that one particular task failed. And so from here on out, the developer would learn about what exactly was introduced or what we found within that application, browse through the request to see what triggered that, as well as learn about how to best fix that vulnerability, how to remediate that vulnerability, and be able to get that pipeline to start passing again. We have integrations into IDEs as well. So developers don't even have to visit the UI. They can go directly to the IDE or directly stay within their IDE and consume that remediation guidance from there. And once they make those changes to the application, that will trigger a subsequent run of the pipeline, and there will Contrast will detect that vulnerability was remediated, and that pipeline will start to pass, and code will be able to get shipped to production, and it will be in alignment to that continuous delivery of making sure we can deliver as fast as possible, as early as possible, and make sure that we're always meeting the demands of the business.
Exactly. So the big thing here is we meet the business where they're at in terms of the consumption. You're not forcing anything. So if you want to click back into the Java pipeline as an example, Ankur, if you click on the YAML, so there's a lot on the screen here, but the thing to know, and Jafar hit about this earlier in the presentation, you want to version your YAML of your pipelines to ensure that they're consistent in terms of business processing, right? Business flows across multiple streams. And this is how you'd leverage things like OpenShift pipelines to create a foundation for your software delivery framework, right? And Jafar, do you want to kind of touch upon that as well?
Yeah, so what I really like about what you did here, guys, is that, think about someone who needs to define a pipeline for 5 solutions. he cannot be an expert in every solution and understand the ins and outs and the APIs that he needs to call in order to get results or in order to check something within the application. So for instance, you guys are going to scan the application and assess a report that says here are the vulnerabilities. But when I'm doing CICD, I don't want to have to go to the UI to check the application status or errors before being able to stop the pipeline or continue if it's a non-critical issue. So you guys provide APIs, and the pipeline then needs to be able to consume the APIs. So what I like with OpenShift pipelines and Tekton is that you can extend basically the capabilities of the CI/CD tool by creating your custom tasks, and I believe that's what you did. So you figured out for your end users what are the best practices, what are the most common steps that they will be needing in their pipelines, and you provided the primitives for that, so they can just drag and drop those tasks within their pipelines and then integrate with Contrast to basically get the job done. So I really like that approach, instead of having like to write a curl on your own and having to scroll through the documentation of the API and not knowing what you have to pass as payloads and stuff like that. So it can be a nightmare if you have to design your pipeline that way. I much prefer like the very polished solution that you provide, where you have the end tasks, and then you can just easily integrate OpenShift with Contrast. So yeah, I really like that approach better. It's one of the value propositions of OpenShift is that it's open and can be extended, and the value proposition that you guys provide is that you have the APIs, and plus now you provide the tasks to work with OpenShift. So I kind of like that.
I like it too. So that's why we made it that way. Because the big thing here is it has to be practical, right? It has to be driven by the telemetry. So Ankur, if you click on pipelines on the left and then click create pipeline, I just want to show visually what Jafar is talking about. So if you click on task and then you click, yep, that's fine. Type in contrast. There you go. This is what Jafar was talking about. So basically you have a whole bunch of custom tasks, which are essentially APIs ingrained, right? That are items that can leverage the telemetry from those APIs to create actions, which is what you want. Because as Jafar mentioned, go ahead.
And then if you just select the task in there, you're gonna see the props that you need to fill in. Sorry. Yeah. So here you already have laid the ground for the user, so he only has to input some parameters, and it's going to be processed by your APIs and such things. So yeah, very easy, I would say, in terms of usage. And again, you can combine your tasks, you can run them in parallel, etc.
Yeah, and that's a flexibility that you get with these tasks, is that you can order them as you'd like, depending on your needs of the business, what types of security are most important to you. So that's this out-of-box integration with OpenShift allows for that flexibility.
Yeah, so also what I like, and one key aspect that Mark mentioned in the beginning, is that you want to have a systematic approach. You want to have, I would say, a templated approach to your pipelines. You don't want to recreate a specific pipeline for each and every application. And that's, for instance, if you look at this Contrast Java, this is a task that you're going to be able to reuse for all your Java applications. You're going to be instrumenting the container image with the Contrast agent, but it's going to be the same repeatable task for all your Java apps. So if you need to change something about how you build your Java apps, you're going to have to do it once in here, and then it's reusable across all the pipelines within the organization. So key aspect, again, this notion of extensibility and templating of your tasks. So you guys created the templates, and then the projects can say, here's the Git repo for my Java app or my Node app or whatever you have provided. And everyone uses basically the same systematic approach to using the pipelines.
Exactly. Now, thank you, Ankur, for giving the demo, and Jafar for explaining how this actually all works into creating a picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back my PowerPoint and wrap things up. So as we mentioned, this is the picture, right? So you have the platform team creating the automation, right? Those templates, the developers and the application teams leveraging those templates, and then the integration in between that are actually embedded inside the pipeline via tasks, as the team just went over now. So essentially all you're doing is you're passing configuration management, right? Dependent on the environment. So you start going into things like cloud native development, 12-factor applications, it's in line directly with that type of methodology. So it fits perfectly to where you create the abstractions necessary to where you can have multiple types of applications using the same business flow, right? And in terms of DevSecOps, you're bootstrapping your entire supply chain and getting the benefit without having to do the work, such as onboarding or whatnot, because it's already baked into the business process itself. Do you guys want to add anything before we wrap it up?
I think you summed it pretty well. So I like the demo. Thank you guys for coming up with this content. Yeah, I think that was a very nice overview of what we can do together with both platforms. So that's awesome. It for me.
Well, first and foremost, if there are no questions, I want to thank you both for joining. And thank you everyone else for joining the webinar as well. We'll be sticking around for any questions from the audience. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Much.
Thanks, Jafar.
Bye. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank Mark, Jafar, and Ankur for taking the time to join our discussion and share their expertise with us. A quick reminder to our audience today that today's session was recorded, so if you missed any of the discussion or you'd just like to rewatch, you'll receive a link via email to access the recording on demand shortly after the webinar concludes today, or you can find it living on the DevOps website if you just visit devops.com/webinars. So quickly, I'll announce our 4 $25 Amazon gift card winners. Our first winner is Sergio D. Our second winner is Patrice C. Our third winner is Andrea G. And our fourth winner is Harish M. So congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. And if you don't find that email, just check your spam folder. I would like to extend our gratitude to Contrast Security for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience. We appreciate you being here with us for today's TechStrong Learning webinar. Please take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future TechStrong Learning webinar.